talking with a whole lot of truth. Remedy Revolution is here for you. Ooh. And now here's your host, Erin Page.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Remedy Revolution podcast. My name is Erin, and I'm really excited about today's guest. It's something that we've talked about a little bit here on the podcast with Teresa Holler. We talked about mold and the Pans Pandas connection. Now we're going to kind of talk about a little bit more about how you take care of your space, the kinds of things that you might want to do if you suspect that you might be living in mold. So I have today my guest Corey Levy, and I'm really excited to have him on the show. He's with Yes, We Inspect, and they are some really, truly doing some amazing work with regard to mold inspections and helping you through that entire process. So thanks so much for being on the show, Corey.
I'm honored to be here, Erin, and I've listened to several of your episodes, and I'm really excited that this topic is being brought up now, and super excited to share how to approach what can be such a daunting aspect when people think mold. There's such a stigma about it, but really, if you break it down, it's very obtainable to go through the process. So really excited for this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the core things that I think really scares a lot of people is this idea that there might be mold in their home. And it feels so overwhelming that they don't even want to look at the possibility that there might be mold. So, talk us through a little bit of that initial process when you suspect, that you've got some health challenges that are currently potentially being impacted by some environmental trigger, perhaps mold, and what that process looks like and how somebody might approach it depending on their current situation.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the biggest thing we need to understand when approaching mold is, first off, that not all mold is created equal. You've got certain molds that are much worse than others. And the initial idea of mold, and if you go and sometimes read online about mold, it can turn into this, oh my God, I'm going to have to tear my entire house down and throw all my contents away. And it becomes this rabbit hole of constantly looking over your shoulder, running in fear of what that's going to turn into. When in actuality, all homes have mold. It's actually impossible to have zero mold. And so what we really want to understand is the type, the quantity, and the impact on the individual. And there's a couple of paths to even get to that realization, because identifying source and understanding cleaning, that's just part of it. But I feel that so many people, and probably a lot of the people who listen to your show, are just not even sure if they even have a problem, right? Because there's this initial fear. And so there's a couple of ways that you can go around even knowing. I always tell everybody this: the secret to finding mold in your home is to not look for mold. It's actually to look for water or water damage, right?
Mhm.
We all have seen what mold looks like on the news, right? The black mold crawling up the wall or over the ceiling. And yes, that is what we find sometimes when we go into people's houses, but actually the majority of the issues that we find are hidden in plain sight. And mold needs moisture to begin growing. And that can come in a variety of different forms. It could come in what we think of like a flood or liquid water pipe leak, or higher relative humidity, right? And different molds will grow within that spectrum. So when I first talk to people and they're just like, hey, I'm working with a practitioner, or, my practitioner is scratching their head as to why I'm even not progressing through my treatment plans, or I really truly believe mold is the source of what's going on. The first free, easiest way that you can understand if you have a problem in your home is just by looking around. And there's really 5 signs of water damage that you can look for. We talk a lot about this. My business partner, Brian, talks a lot about this on our podcast too. It's staining of building materials. It's buckling of building materials or separation of building materials, bubbling of building materials, rust, right? So discoloration and rusting, and efflorescence, which is almost like a powdery dust-like substance you would see on stone. These are all little footprints that water is going to leave behind even after it's dry. And the likelihood, Aaron, is that when you have these little different clues that happen or water events, even though they may seem so micro and small, molds can grow within 24 to 48 hours. And so even if we stop that moisture and no more water is coming into the environment, depending on the length of time that's been going on for, that building material has sat wet for so long that you would, almost guarantee that there's going to be some sort of mold that is growing in that space, right? Now, the longer that moisture's there, the longer that building material sits wet for, different types of molds start to evolve and come into the process. So just off like a very initial, hey, I'm just going to look around, look underneath sinks, look around windows, think water. How does water impact, not just from exterior, but where we get water throughout our home? And when you look in these areas, if you're seeing these signs, that's a good indication that, hey, you know what? It may make sense for me to get a professional in here to look at this place and take more targeted testing throughout the home to figure out what's going on.
So, what is it that initially makes people want to come visit you? Because I presume that the vast majority of people aren't just like, oh, I just want to make sure that I don't have, mold in my home. It's more than likely it's people that are starting to experience symptoms. Things like it can be respiratory issues, can be neurological issues, can be, just a lot of fatigue and anxiety and those kinds of things. So, what is it typically that brings people to see you guys? And what are you able to offer that perhaps the local Joe Schmo down the street inspector might might offer? What is it that's different?
Yeah, it's really about the approach and the process. But to answer the first part of that question, um, symptoms are a big part of it, for sure. A lot of our clients are referred by practitioners, right? So
Mhm.
they actually have clinical lab results. They've done mycotoxin analysis of the urine or the blood to see that they're being impacted. They've done an allergy test that's showing them certain mold species they're reacting to. So the range of that is really dependent on the byproduct the mold produces. So mold will produce three main byproducts that can impact us as an individual. The first one are spores, and that's where you get a lot of what you initially brought up, Aaron. It's the respiratory issues, it's the allergenic responses. It can cause overall inflammation within the body that we hear a lot of. But they can colonize us. And so what that looks like is it can grow in our nasal passage, it can grow on our skin or even in our gut. So there's the component of these spores that float around these seeds that we can react to. The second is actually a gas that they can produce, this musty, mildewy, earthy odor, which I know we've all experienced at some point, whether it's at grandma's house or in a bookstore or going to the grocery store. There's this weird kind of odor that you get sometimes. And that's actually called an MVOC, microbial volatile organic compound. It's part of the mold's digestion process. So when molds are growing on a surface, they're eating and breaking things down. And as part of that byproduct, sometimes they'll release an odor. Not all the time, but when it's there, it's pretty noticeable. And a lot of times we hear irritations, burning eyes, headaches, scratchy throats, particularly for those that are more chemically sensitive. And then you have what you mentioned kind of a little bit latter to that, Aaron, which is what I consider almost more chronic issues, right? And
Mhm.
that's a third byproduct molds produce that are called mycotoxins. Mycotoxins are actual chemicals produced by molds as defense mechanisms. So when you hear somebody say toxic mold, they're, yes, talking about a specific mold, but the chemical that they're talking about is a mycotoxin. Now, what's really interesting about mycotoxins, some of them are benign or are actually used in medicine. So antibiotics like penicillin are derived from mold mycotoxins to kill
Hmm.
bacteria in our body, right? And what are we? We're walking bacteria. So if you have that in your home and you have certain mycotoxins that produce, or molds that produce mycotoxins that are known to be more adverse health impacting, we hear a lot of things like brain fog, fatigue, immune system disruption, right? Reproductive issues. Some in high doses can be carcinogen. So, it really depends looking at the full spectrum of how people react. You have certain people that don't detox well, where mycotoxins become a bigger problem. You have certain people that are affected by the spores themselves, or some people that aren't impacted by it at all. And it really is dependent on the individual. So when people typically come to us, Aaron, it's usually because of the knowledge that we hold, right? Because the Joe Schmo showing up to the house, if you will, is more of an air quality assessor
Hmm.
versus somebody who is truly doing an inspection of the home, right? And I think that this is where the biggest difference becomes between us and the average person. Even though when you go online, you'll see that, oh, this person's certified and so are we. Um, the certifications don't hold as much clout because you can get them very quickly. And if you're
Hmm.
trained the wrong way and you just continue doing the wrong thing for so many years, um, they're not going to provide the service that's needed for the individual, right? So a lot of our clients are coming because they have worked with the Joe Schmo who's come into their home and has just spent about an hour or two in the house, ran a bunch of air samples, and everything comes back fine. Yet their practitioner saying, no, no, you've got this in your body, you've got these symptom sets all aligning up. Um, why are these air samples coming fine? And it's really more about not checking the air quality, but actually performing an inspection of the building. And,
Hmm.
and this is uh, crucial in this process, right? So, for example, the way that we go through our process is really truly understanding what the client is dealing with. As I mentioned before, all those different symptom sets. So understanding, hey, what did your doctor find in your body? What did your practitioner see that sent you down this path that molds a problem? Because that may dictate certain things in the home. And then once we're in the house, it's every accessible area, attic to crawl space that should be checked. The exterior needs to be evaluated to see if there's entry points where moisture can get in the home. We're not just looking for visible mold like we talked about before, or even active moisture, but signs of previous damage. The ventilation systems need to be opened up. All the air handler units, the AC units need to be looked in. And when you get through that type of assessment process, it's not an hour or two, it's, an all day affair, right?
Hmm.
You're there all day, sometimes longer, depending on the size of the home. And that's just the evaluation part before you start diving into the right type of testing to diagnose the home and give the homeowner or renter the information they need to make decisions. Uh, because, like I mentioned at the beginning of this call, it's not that everything needs to be treated the same, right? Every single area within the home is, uh, is going to need to have a different remedial strategy on how it's going to get removed. But also, there are going to be things in the home that are super urgent and the things that aren't um, as urgent to handle in more of an immediate fashion, but can be handled over time. And so, getting the right thorough assessment, knowing that every home has some degree of mold, and then from there, getting data from testing that allows you to prioritize things and get the right remediation strategy for each of those areas within the home and what to do holistically throughout the environment.
Okay, so let's back up a little bit. Let's just play out this scenario. So if I I did want to look underneath my cabinets and I look under the kitchen sink and I see what looks like mold. Tell me the things that I should do and then the things that I should not do in that particular scenario. Because I think people start to panic, right? They find mold and then they start ripping stuff up and, doing all of these things. My understanding is that can honestly make things much worse. So tell us a little bit about that. What can somebody do if they do find what looks like mold?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought this up because I hear from so many people that, well, I saw this and I threw bleach on it, or hey, I saw this over here, so I called my handyman to come in and just rip this out. And that can spiral in so many directions, right? So first off, let's start there. Let's start with the bleach stuff, right? Because we know bleach to be a cleaner, right? And yes, bleach is great for certain things, but when you're talking about mold cleanup, it is not a good thing to use. There's a number of reasons why, but the main one is it doesn't absorb deep enough into the material, and mold produces roots that go deep into the material. And so you're essentially bleaching or cleaning the top layer, and the mold is going to come right back. And the bleach evaporates quickly because it's a chemical. And then what's left behind is the water that you just threw, because that's what bleach is mixed with to dilute
Mhm.
it. And now you just added water to more mold, right? So it's going to come back with a vengeance. So let's put bleach over for bathroom cleaning. Honestly, there's better things you could be using in your home besides bleach, but let's just start by not using that for mold cleanup. As far as doing work yourself, I always recommend utilizing a certified, or depending on your state, licensed remediation contractor to do the work. And the key word there, Aaron, is remediation
Mhm.
contractor. There's very different certifications and processes when you talk about somebody who does general contractor work versus remediation and mold removal. Uh, there are certain engineering controls that need to be put in place to prevent the spread of spores when you remove something. So what you may see underneath your kitchen sink, the bubbling or even visible suspect mold, many times is just the tip of the iceberg of what could be behind those areas that you're not seeing. And when you visually see that mold, that actually represents billions and billions of mold spores that are concentrated into a particular area. Because when these spores are released, we can't see them floating around. They're about half the size of one single human hair, just to give you kind of perspective of that.
Mhm.
But when they're clustered, we can see them. So imagine those little weed dandelion things you have out front with the white poof on top. And if you're like me as a kid, I would play with those things all the time, rip them out and blow them, and those things go all over the place. Um, if you disturb that in your home, that's kind of what you're doing. And so when you rip that building material out, these spores go everywhere. And so what a remediation company does before they do any type of removal, they actually build what's called a containment around these areas with special air scrubbers to help prevent these spores from now getting flung all over the place. And it can, what I've seen before is you end up going down this path of where you remove it, you think you did it all, and then even worse than doing it without the right containment, you rebuild over the problem. And I can't tell you the number of clients we deal with where they say, hey, we had a contractor come in, they saw some stuff, they removed it, they said they removed it all, and then we've rebuilt our bathroom. And then we test and there's still mold there because they weren't trained on how to properly remove it. So having the right team around you, from diagnostic to writing the protocols on how to remediate it to the remediation team removing it, is key to make sure that everything is being done properly. And you're not just throwing good resource towards something that ultimately you're going to have to do over and over again.
Okay, so Obviously, I think the key thing here is if you're experiencing lots of symptoms that you suspect might be being caused by mold, and you do find mold, how do we then determine which particular molds are troublesome for that particular person?
Oh, awesome question. Okay. So there's a couple ways you can do that. There's clinical testing first, right? Now, this isn't necessarily a necessity through the process, but I'm a huge believer in data, and like understanding truly what's going on in the body can help dictate your motions for the home. So there's mycotoxin testing that you can do of the body. There's a couple ways that that's done right now. I'd say the most common that I see is through urine analysis. There's several labs that do that: real time, Mosaic, Vibrant. And then there's also of the blood. My Myco lab does that as well. Um, Additionally, you may hear of organic acid testing, which is looking at what's going on in the gut flora, what could be happening within your gut, because a lot of this stuff goes in the nose, into the mucus, and down into the gut. And so there's can be big impact there as well. And then there are certain ways that we can look at IgG or IgE levels within the body that could indicate even more current exposures as well, not just looking at the mycotoxins or organic acids that are being produced in the gut. Now, what's really interesting about getting that information for the individual is that we can then do certain types of testing within the home to understand if those things correlate back to what's going on in the body. So there's a screen test that we created called the dust test that for certain individuals, if they're not seeing any of these cues or signs, that they can actually go through their home and collect their dust, and it will break it out into 36 common indoor mold species, 26 of them found in homes with water damage or mold, and 10 of them found in homes with no water damage or mold. It's actually called an ERMI. Have you ever heard of ERMI before, Aaron?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so ERMI was created by the EPA during a healthy home survey that they did, where they surveyed 1,100 homes, and they came up with this panel of 36 molds. And so we've actually taken that same panel of mold and crossed it from data from our inspection division to give an interpretation of, hey, based off the mold load in your home, there's something going on here. You should take the next step to figuring out where those issues are in the environment. So even if you're at this in the beginning, you've done some of the clinical testing with your practitioner, and now we're saying, okay, is it in my home? You can correlate just with that test alone. So then it is correlating. Let's talk about how we figure that out in the house. So when we come in and perform this very thorough inspection, we're not just saying, oh, there's water damage here, there's water damage here, good luck. We're actually saying, okay, there's water damage here. Let's take an air sample inside of that wall, floor, ceiling cavity to determine the type of mold that's there. And then there's mold growing on that surface. Let's swab that mold to determine what type of mold is there. And that then can again get correlated back to some of these tests. So if you are somebody who has, let's say, trichothecenes in the body, trichothecenes is a mycotoxin produced commonly, a group of mycotoxins commonly produced by mold species called Stachybotrys chattarum, okay, known as the black mold. And so if you're seeing that in the body, and we're seeing it in certain areas of the home, we're able to then say, oh, well, this is going to be a top priority for you because we can see that you're having difficulties detoxing this, or it's in the body. And so it really starts to allow us to help the client determine, okay, we've got trichothecenes in the body. We've got 3 areas with Stachybotrys. These areas need to be highly focused and prioritized because of what we know is going on in the body and what we're finding in the home.
Is there ever any instances where you look at mold levels and it is not worth it to remediate? It's in the client's best interest just to do the worst case scenario, leave everything behind and leave the home entirely. Does that ever occur? Have you ever seen that?
Yeah, I've seen it. I there are isolated situations where I say that typically makes a lot of sense to do, which is go in and um, it is so far gone. The cost to remediate financially for that individual significantly outweighs what they're capable of doing, right? What I always try and help unpack is, okay, even if we have, let's say, 15 sources in somebody's house that we find, and 14 of them are high priority, and they're saying, hey, look, I can't financially swing this, then
Mhm.
okay, then that's a situation that we're in, and moving then makes sense, right? um I'd say that is more of a rarity in what I see, versus actually investing in where you're at, because it's not like this home is the home that people are in is the, like, unicorn, and that your neighbor doesn't have mold, and that mom's house doesn't have mold, and 2 states away, a home that you may look at doesn't have some degree of mold, right? There's always going to be source. And so if you love where you're at and you want to stay, and your kids are in the schools, and it's a place that you don't want to leave, well, then by tiering things out and understanding that each dollar I put into my home to remediate should in turn provide an uptick in overall air quality, then you tackle things as you go through the process.
Mhm.
Because unfortunately, currently, as we talk, the market that we're in is so inflated. And what I tend to see is that we move laterally. And as the saying goes, is it better to deal with the devil you know or the devil you don't know? Right. And I so commonly see people move thinking that, oh, well, I think I could find a better place. And they move, but these better places are prepped. They're freshly painted. They're doing quick fixes to make things look aesthetically nice. And then people are moving in and they're not seeing a shift in how they're feeling. And then you start to unpack things and it's, whoa, now my mortgage has gone up. I'm at a higher interest rate and I'm in no better of a situation than I was before. Yet I knew more about my house. And then it feels like this new place is just an onion. And every time I turn a corner, there's a new layer here that is something that I need to face. So I think it's about getting the right action plan around it and knowing you don't need to bite the whole apple in one bite. Let's take bites through it and really figure out what truly makes the most sense for me to focus on right now. Let's take a look at what this is really going to cost, what this is really going to look like, and then say, okay, well, I can do the bathroom now, and then I'll do the kitchen or whatever these other areas are throughout the home. But at least I know every time I'm doing it, I'm stepping in the right direction.
So, what can a lot of times people come to me and they say, well, my house is new, so it doesn't have mold. And I'm like, well, actually, most houses have mold. It's pretty impossible to completely avoid. But um, what are some of the other misconceptions that people might discount mold entirely because of something like, oh, well, I live in a new build?
I love the misconception ones. Okay, this is good. So I'd say the first one that I would hear is, even, and I'll get to the new build in a second. It's like, well, it's dry now, so there's no mold. If anybody can leave this conversation with one thing, just because it's dry doesn't mean that there's no mold anymore. And unfortunately, kind of like what we talked about earlier, Aaron, most inspection companies are only looking for active moisture. So if they're coming in and they're not seeing anything wet, they're going to tell you everything is fine. Most of the problems we find in people's homes are related to previous water damage events. So that's the first one. The second one is exactly what you just said. I have a brand new build. there's no way there's mold here. And unfortunately, these things are not built in a warehouse somewhere. Our houses are built in the land, outdoor with the elements. And so the first part of this process that we commonly see impacting building is, all right, we're putting up the framing, the wood framing, and it rains. So we're going to take a day off as builders, but that wood is not covered in tarps. It just gets hammered with rain or snow, right? And then even if you have a builder who is really hyper focused on, going through the process and drying things as they go, a lot of the lumber that shows up to the building site is moldy when it shows up. So you need to have a builder who's conscious of seeing things and throwing them away. And actually, a good number of builders that I have spoken to is like, yeah, we know, we look and we get rid of the stuff that looks the worst, right? But even if I do this for fun, which is probably the nerdiest thing that I can ever say. But every time I go into a Home Depot or a Lowe's or wherever, and I walk down the wood aisle, just look at what they're selling in those stores. Okay. And you're going to notice, now that I'm telling you, you're going to notice all these black spots on a lot of the wood that they're selling in there. Right. And so if you've got that in a store just on the shelves, imagine where you've got nobody looking over your shoulder, where there's nobody coming in to determine what you're putting in there is right. And you've got people that are trying to meet deadlines and move quickly because we have a housing crisis. So builders are trying to build really, really, really fast, right? And unfortunately, when materials come in, yes, they may throw away, some of the worst looking items, but a lot of stuff still makes it through and gets into the building, right? And then furthering that, even after the wood is up, after the framing's up and the home is what we call dried in, things still happen in that process that can impact the home. A really good example, we see a lot of things happen with the HVAC system. They put ductwork in before they put drywall up. And so what happens many times is they don't cap the ductwork. Mm-hmm. So they're cutting drywall, they're doing everything they do in construction, and they're contaminating these duct lines with all of this particulate. And then you have an HVAC system that's hooked up to it that's pumping cool air or warm air through it. And that can cause the ductwork to get contaminated or the system itself. So unfortunately, new home builds are not free and clear of mold. And then you add into this idea of the products themselves, being toxic, right? It's not just mold. There's other things that can impact us in the environment, and building materials off-gas VOCs, which are volatile organic compounds, which for certain individuals can be very disruptive. They off-gas formaldehydes, which can be very disruptive. And so you kind of put all of these things together and it creates a soup, if you will, of different contaminants that can impact us. And so if you have somebody who is sensitive, who maybe is dealing with an underlying health condition, and you drop them into a new build home, yeah, maybe there's less areas of damage throughout the home. But they're sensitive enough to these different contaminants that it can still impact them versus a home maybe that's 100 years old. And the final point on new builds I want to bring up that I think is very overlooked is how we insulate houses now is very detrimental. And so even after you build, let's say you get through all of that and there's no obvious issues going on, you're living in the house and these tiny little micro water events that I call them occur. We build houses and we over insulate them to meet certain energy efficiency standards, but that also reduces the airflow through a building. And so these smaller water events that would have happened, 60, 70, 80 years ago, where the homes were built and the air moves through the house very differently, air doesn't move the same. So it becomes stagnant. Water doesn't dry up as quickly. Molds can form and grow a lot faster. And so you really need to act quickly, even though you think, oh, well, the sink leaked for an hour and I stopped it immediately. Well, unfortunately, that may have a bigger impact, even though it's this brand new construction home.
So I really love how client-centered you guys are and how you're looking at the individuals that are coming to you as their own person, their own family unit, rather than kind of this broad brush approach. The first time I had ever heard about mold being an issue was over 10 years ago. And I think that the conventional thinking at that time anyway was kind of like, oh, burn it all down. But at the time, we were renting a home that we suspected had mold in it. And so, um, the solutions were going to be much different than, say, somebody who owned a home, in our particular scenario. So, how do you work with individuals and helping them decide the different pathways that they might be able to take? I think, um, so often we want to systematize everything, but I love that you guys are looking at things so individually. So tell me a little bit about that process. How do you help the client determine what the next steps might be for them?
Yeah, I'm really happy you brought this up because conventional inspections just puts everybody in this box and that's it, right? And they're taught and trained to go in, run air samples, wet, yes, problem, air, and that's it, right? That those are the only paths. And that's for the average, and we're not operating in averages anymore. I think there's such a trend now, like you said. 10 years ago, that was everybody would laugh almost at mold, right? There was very little information. I think it's becoming more mainstream now, and people are realizing the impact. And it really boils down to understanding everybody's individual situation. A renter is going to have a different goal than a homeowner. Rental situations, and Aaron, you probably know this from your own situation. It's difficult because you're stuck to the standard of care that the management company, the landlord, is going to latch onto. And sometimes the landlord is whatever I need to do to help you out here and make you feel better. But the large majority of what we see is not that. And it, at the end of the day, is a business. And they are going to lean towards their experts who try and fit everybody into the box. The nothing is wet here and the air looks fine in the center of their room. And so for us, we actually look at it as, what is the occupant going through, right? Let's understand and unpack their individual situation. So before we step foot on site to do an inspection, we actually have them onboarded with their lead consultant, which is their, for lack of a better term, we have a project manager who's overseeing their entire process, right? And they're going to ask them what is going on in the building that they know about historically. Tell me about your situation. Do you have a good relationship with your landlord? As a homeowner, do you love this area? Do you want to move, right? Tell me about what they're finding in your body clinically. What symptoms are you having? Because it's not always mold. Sometimes we show up to people's houses and we find things outside of mold that could be impacting them, right? And so really unpacking what they're going through, and ultimately, what is your goal? What are we looking to accomplish coming out of the backside of this so we can best shepherd you through this process and really align with you on what your next steps should look like based off what we find. And then once we're on site, we have our own box that we make sure we keep standard to, right? Our checklist of where we need to look in every single room type, of what our tool belt is that we may employ. But even though we have that checklist, every single home is completely different, right? So the sample strategy is going to change. The types of samples, the quantity of samples is all going to be based upon what we visually find through that assessment process, and then what we understand to be going on with the client and the individual. And after we perform that assessment, it's not a, hey, we ran through and grabbed all these tests, we'll let you know what comes back. We actually, before we send anything to the lab, we then regroup again with the client and say, hey, visually, here's what we found. We show them over Zoom each of the documented areas, the problems, why we're concerned about them, what issues we found in the home, that need to be addressed maybe by another type of contractor, like there's grading issues or there's no gutters on the house, those sort of things. But the big part, Aaron, is these are the samples that we collected from your home and we think we should send off to a lab. And these are why we collected them and what is it that it's going to tell us. And I think that if when people are determining how they're going to, or who they're going to hire to come into their home, if somebody cannot articulate to you why they're taking a sample from somewhere, then you could have done that sample yourself, right? And data is only as good to you if you know what to do with that data on the back end. So it's really important to have an understanding of the samples that are being collected in your home, and ultimately what is going to help them determine on the back end of this, right? For us, it all bubbles up to, we need to write a remediation strategy, the cleanup, the proper way to remove mold from a home. But we also need to be able to sit across the table from our clients and be able to tell them, hey, look, your kitchen is not good, really bad. And we feel that you need to remediate that first. And here is why you need to do that. And here are the levels. This is what it told us. And so when we get all that data back and we write that report, and we write that prioritization, we then sit down with them again to explain all of that and then help them understand what their next steps may need to be, from how do I engage a remediation contractor? Do I have any chance with insurance? What are my next moves? Because there's so many businesses out there that will just come in and run up a bill for a few $1,000s or less, sometimes a few $100s, and you're going to get a very subpar response, and then you're even more confused through that process. It really, I like to challenge people to say, the more inquisitive you are in the process, the better, because you're going to find that if you're asking questions and they don't have answers, not the right people to be dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you guys are looking at this really from a holistic perspective, taking into account things like, what the family is experiencing in that space and how it's impacting their lives in order to make the most conscientious decision about how to proceed. Because so often I think it's just this very overwhelming, daunting task where you feel like, I don't know what to do. We don't have, hundreds of thousands of dollars to completely remediate our entire home. So where do we go from here? And I feel like that leaves so many people feeling so trapped in their own home, in scenarios that aren't healthy for them. So I love what you guys are doing. I think it's amazing. All right, Corey. So we have reached the tail end of our show where I ask every single guest 8 rapid fire questions. These questions are designed to give us a little bit more insight into who you are and what makes you tick. Are you ready?
I am ready.
All right. If you could choose only one natural remedy for the rest of your life, what would it be?
And well, I mean, it's got to be air related, right? Clean air, obviously. I mean, I believe that's like the foundation of a lot of things, right? We take 20,000 breaths in a day, right? So even if we're opening up windows and diluting what we're breathing in or getting time outside to ground ourselves and really make sure that we're protecting what we're breathing, it attaches everything you can do from detoxing to mental headspace, but making sure you're breathing and taking the time to get clean, fresh air each day.
Awesome. All right. Number two, tell us something most people don't know about you.
Oh, wow. Okay. I think that I was so when I when I was younger, I was really into music and I actually was a DJ for a while. So that's actually where I started. I had, this I'm going to date myself here. But I had the bleach blonde spiky hair and I would, DJ weddings and at bars and stuff. I still love music, but my passion now is mold, which is even weirder.
All right. So, going along with that, if I were to compile a playlist of happy music, what song would you suggest be added?
I'm a big Coldplay fan. One of my favorite songs is an Adventure of a Lifetime. And it talks about the rediscovering, I guess, if you will, of joy, of love, and the feeling that there's always pressure, but out of pressure comes diamonds, right? And so it's one of my favorite songs. I've my 3.5 year old, I've trained him to also love Coldplay, and it's one of our favorite songs that we listen to together.
Awesome. That's always the best. All
Yes.
right. What is your favorite guilty pleasure?
Ooh. Um, Okay. Guilty pleasure. Okay. So I really like chocolate. So I hope my wife's not listening. I have a secret stash of dark chocolate hidden because if she knew I had chocolate in the house, she would get into it too, and she'd be all pissed off at me. But I have one like in the back corner of the pantry, and as I take my supplements every night, it's a little chaser before I go up to bed.
Nice. Very cool. All right. What is the most influential book you've ever read?
Oh, wow. Do you know Simon Sinek? Are you familiar with his
I
work?
am. Yeah.
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 I love a lot of Simon Sinek, but he's got a book called Start with Why, which is one of my favorite books of all time. And it's really helped me anchor to kind of everything that I do around purpose. And it's really the through line of what we do here at We Inspect. It's why are we doing this? Why are we helping people? And really looking to build a system that's going to give them the answers to their questions as well.
All right. What does the word revolution mean to you?
Huh. I've actually recently gotten that question asked of me before too. Um, I think it's about challenging the norm. I don't, I think it's about pushing boundaries and I look at the industry that I'm in and the way that I perceive it to be, which is a system that's one-sided. It's really more focused on how do we protect building owners, how do we protect insurance companies versus really truly looking at the individual in the home and how they're feeling. And so I consider it to be a part of challenging the way that what has happened in my industry that I'm in and how I can push beyond the boundaries of what is considered to be normal to really get people the information they need.
All right. And what does the word remedy mean to you?
Well, remedy means remediation, right? Not just of the body, but of the home.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, I think, yeah, that's what it would mean to me. Remediation, cleanup, that, yeah.
And lastly, if you could impart one piece of wisdom onto our listeners, what would that be?
Ooh. So I think you started off this talk with a perfect question, which was this overwhelming thought of what mold can be. And you know this just as well as I do. Time can really cause harm. And the longer you wait for something like this, the worse the consequences can be. And so even if we're scared of getting the information, and even though this saying ignorance is bliss exists for a reason, a lot of what I see right now, Aaron, is stemming back to the environment, to what we breathe in, to what we're eating on a regular basis. All of these things are creating some pretty systemic problems for people. And it's about putting the puzzle together to know which pieces fit where. And this is part of the piece of the problem. And having that puzzle piece may solve everything that you've been working on for so long. And getting with a company like ours, or at least getting the data that you need to start to understand, okay, this is the path I need to go down, I think is really powerful. And thinking about the health to home connection of what we've been working on for 2 decades now has really been the path for so many people to heal.
Well, thank you so much, Corey. This has been such a pleasure. Please tell our guests where can they connect with you and learn more about the fabulous service that you guys offer.
Yeah. So yesweinspect.com is where you can find more about We Inspect. The dust test is what I mentioned earlier before, which is at home screening tool. So the dusttest.com is another great place. And then if you're on social media, at Mold Finders is where you can find us on Instagram as well.
Well, thank you so much, Corey. Thanks to all of our listeners. We look forward to talking to you again next time. Thank you. Take care.
With hope as a guiding light, through darkest days we'll fight the night. With a whole lot of passion, with a whole lot of truth, Remedy Revolution is here for you.